Hey bro, want to go for a ride today?
Yeah man, totally. Except I need to install new wheel bearings since I just got them powder coated. They look sick as fuck.
Oh shit. Well, those wheels are for sure gonna get you mad bitches. In the meantime, you should check out Sean's YouTube channel. He made a pretty legit video on installing wheel bearings.
Oh word?
Hey guys, Sean here. Tonight we're in the garage, we are cold, and we're working on wheel bearings. So if you're not sure why I'm taking the wheel bearings out and putting them back in, not the same ones, new ones of course, it's because I got my wheels powder coated. I got two sets of them powder coated. One is going to be for the practice tires, or you know, your whatever regular street tires, something to go out. Maybe a set of rains if I decide I'm going to be riding in the rain. But in order to powder coat, the right way to do it anyway would be to take the wheel bearings out, because you can't have bearings in the hub while you're baking the powder coat on, because you put them in an oven at, I don't know what, 450, 500 degrees or something like that for a couple hours, and it would bake the grease out of the bearing, I think. Not 100% sure, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So this is the set that I'm working on now. Basically, all you got to do is find a way to press your wheel bearing into the hole. This can be done with either a hub tamer, or if you have appropriately sized sockets. I'm going to be doing a combination of both today, and I'll kind of walk you through the process and show you how to do it. This is going to be similar for Suzuki's, for Hondas, for Kawasaki's. They all pretty much have the same concept. Now, whether they have exactly the same bearings and setup and placement that Yamaha does, that might be different. But I'll kind of try and walk you through the basic concept of getting the bearing inside of the back inside of the wheel. This is also good to do maybe every like 16 to 20,000 miles on any bike, especially if you ride pretty hard. Bearings can wear out. They can cause resistance in the rotation of the wheel. They rob you of power, and it's also could be a safety measure. You know, if a bearing comes apart inside of your wheel and you're going like 120 miles an hour, that could definitely be a big safety concern. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run inside and grab my bearings, and I'm going to get started on doing this and kind of walk you through it. Okay, so for starters, Yamaha does things a little bit differently. I didn't seem to notice this on the other manufacturers, but what you have is a tiny little needle bearing. Well, it's not tiny, but it's not nearly as big as the roller bearings that are actually going to provide your roll for the axle. Whereas this needle bearing just goes in the cush, in the drive side of the rear wheel, and its only purpose is really to support the rotation and the difference between the drive and the hub, and any load that might be on the axle between the hub and the wheel, if that makes sense. So this bearing does not need to support a lot, which is why it's a needle bearing and not a roller bearing. Your roller bearings are going to be taking the brunt of the drive from your engine, whereas this needle bearing just needs to compensate for that little bit of difference that might be in the cush drive. That axle might move, you know, just a fraction of a millimeter, and this bearing kind of helps things stay rolling so that it does not bind and it doesn't put extra stress on the axle between the cush drive and between your hub, where your sprocket is, and the rear wheel itself. So I left these in the freezer for a week. I didn't heat the wheel or anything, but I'm figuring that it might be just a little bit easier, because when you put things in the freezer, they tend to shrink. That was a tip that was given to me. People say you should freeze the bearings, not the seals. Don't put the seals in the freezer, but freeze the bearings and then heat the wheel with like a torch or something. I'm going to forego that because A, I don't have a torch, and I don't really feel like risking doing anything to these freshly powder coated wheels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my socket, which is just a little bit smaller than the shoulder of this needle bearing. I'm going to pre-grease that bore here just to make things a little bit easier. So I'm just using regular like Valvoline synthetic grease for, you know, like an automotive wheel bearing or something like that. Shouldn't be too critical what you use. Just anything that's going to help promote the slippage of needle bearing into bore. I'll try and get it straight as possible. I'm going to be using a combination of rubber mallets and an actual hammer. Just trying to keep it square. Then once you get it actually seated, you might be able to use just a block of wood. In fact, I probably would have better to do from the beginning. Until you get it completely flush. Just be careful you don't get wood fibers in your bearing like I just did. Seems to be going. You'll probably be able to tell audibly when it's at its bottom. That should be it. You can always double check, even though I can't feel my fingers. I think it's probably about 40 degrees in here. So now that one's in. We're going to move on to the other side, which gets one of the big bearings, like this. And for this one, I have some drivers from like an automotive hub tamer. So I think this one is the one that's like exactly the size I need. I'm just going to drive it in with this one first, and then once I need the smaller size to fit inside the wheel, I'll go that way. And that is going in crooked as fuck. So I just want to re-emphasize, what you're really looking to do is drive the bearing in on this outer race. Because if you're driving on the inner race here, all you're doing is pressing on the inside of the bearing and putting stress on the rolling mechanism of it, of the balls inside and the mechanism that keeps it all together, basically. But the outer race allows you to press the entire bearing in without messing up the internal inside. And this is a sealed bearing, so this is already pre-greased, but it doesn't hurt to put a little extra grease around the outside too. That keeps, you know, kind of dust, dirt, and debris from getting to the outer seal of the bearing. So pressing forward, no pun intended. So that is the bottom of that bearing. Feels like, anyway. And after that, on the R6, I think most everything else is going to be pretty similar. There is a circlip that holds that bearing in the braking side, which would be the right side of the wheel. Just going to grab my circlip pliers. These are Harbor Freight circlip pliers. I don't recommend these. They're a pain in the ass, as you'll be able to tell shortly. Nearly impossible to use for something this size. So in all likelihood, I'll have to use a combination of this. Jesus Christ. And like a screwdriver. What the fuck? Yeah, these are fucking broken. Okay, I somehow managed to fix these, probably just temporarily. Jesus Christ.
These are going in the trash immediately. I'm going to the Snap-on truck and I'm spending way too much money for something that's going to work every single time.
Alright, so the circlip is in. This just ensures that any side load on the bearing isn't going to press it outwards from its bore. Beyond this, what you have is an oil seal. You got 2 oil seals. These are all balls bearings. Really good stuff. I would swear by them. I think a lot of people say they're even better than OEM, but I don't know, don't take our word for it. These are the seals for the rear. We have 2 for the front. So at this point, all I really need to do, and I mean, you don't absolutely have to, but I like to put a little bit of grease inside this seal and around the seat for the oil seal. The seal should keep dust and dirt and debris out of there, and then the oil keeps the smaller particle, or the grease keeps the smaller particles, or should anyway, keep the smaller particles from getting inside the bearing. And you kind of end up splitting hairs on whether it does or doesn't make a difference, but I like to, anything that gives me that little extra peace of mind, I'd say is worth the time. Get that seated. Pretty much done with this guy. The only thing that would sit on top of this is the extra dust cover that comes with the other collar. Which means we can move on to the front wheel and the cush drive, which the other main bearing goes in. I think we'll do the cush drive first, keep on the theme of the rear wheel. Alright, so here is our hub with our sprocket. And in order to take this apart, more Harbor Freight shit. Alright. These aren't my only pry bars. I'm just going to pry the seal out of this one. A little bit of pressure. And this sprocket isn't staying. This sprocket's going to be useless. This is the original 525 sprocket, so I don't really care about this. If it gets bent, seems to be working. And boom goes the dynamite. So what you end up with is this regular looking bearing hole. And before I throw that away, this is why you probably wouldn't want to reuse them. This seal is toast. These are the bearings that you're replacing. This bike has about 20,000 miles or so. And you know, these don't look too terrible, but like I said about the powder coating, it's just worth the peace of mind to put new bearings in it. And it's kind of a moot point for me because I don't really have any other choice the way I see it. This, like I was saying before, isn't the most important step or anything. It just makes installing a little bit easier because it keeps that hole a little bit slippery. And that's what she said. So kind of repeat the same process for this one. So that's that. Alright, so skipping ahead a little bit, I already got one side of the front wheel done. Bearing is in, seal is in. We're going to flip it over. Very important part of the front wheel is this center axle guide. Without it, the axle would be pretty difficult to put in. All it really does is space the center of the bearings and keep them. You have your left side bearing and your right side bearing, and on the inner race in between them you have this piece. All it does is really keep them spaced, and I guess it probably makes the axle a little bit easier to slide in and out. You can't get it in and out without removing one of the bearings, so before you put in your second bearing, you have to put this axle slider in. And when your axle gets to the, or when your bearing gets to the bottom of its bore here, it'll bottom out on both the wheel the shoulder inside the wheel, and this axle spacer, or the bearing spacer, I should say. So for this front one, repeat the process. Second verse, same as the first. I think we're on like the third verse by now. It's more than enough grease. I like to keep things pretty greasy because when I bought this bike and started taking everything apart, yeah, that was a pain in the ass. So I always like to keep things pretty well lubricated. Like, I don't want grease dripping off of my stuff, but at least the parts that need it, you know, give it a liberal coat. You know, a tub of this grease is what, like, you know, not even $10 at any auto parts store. Just on the parts that you're going to need to service regularly, just to keep dust and keep them from corroding. Grease is pretty good stuff. So I'm just going to get this even. I'm going to give it a good whack to start with. Hopefully it goes in straight. Fuck me. Alright, well, whatever, it worked. Famous last words. I guess I should say that this is probably not the definitive guide. This is not the be-all, end-all of installing wheel bearings. I'm just sharing this to show you how I did it. There's much better ways, I think, with bearing pullers, bearing installers. There's a plethora of tools. I work at a dealership, and the guys in the shop, you know, were kind of giving me some advice because I've done a lot of work on bikes, but never actually had to remove or reinstall wheel bearings. So this is kind of my first shot at doing this. Should be good. We just got one more seal. Alright, so that should be in. We've just got our spacers, our little dust caps, and aside from needing to install the rotors, that's about it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Like I said, if you have any comments or if you have any suggestions as to what would make this job easier, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on the process. If there's anything I could have done better, I'm sure there's plenty I could have done better, but a little bit lacking in the workspace. I got shit all over the place right now, so I feel perfectly fine doing these on the floor. You know, my knees are cramped up, but hey, you know, whatever you got to do to get the job done, sometimes it takes a little bit of sacrifice. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.